Mark Zuckerberg is the co-founder and CEO of Facebook and the only person under 50 in the Forbes 10 richest people list with a net worth of over $98 billion. He went from being a college dropout who started Facebook from his dorm room at Harvard to becoming the world's youngest billionaire when he was only 23 years old. Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like 9 and 9. For my top 10, top 10, 9 and 9. This one's for my top 10.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Mark Zuckerberg, and my take on his top 50 rules for success. Enjoy.
First of all, focus on it, right? I mean, I think like you basically get what you spend your time doing, right? I mean, I want the company to build 3 products this year. I mean, we're going to work on a few others because people are interested in them, but those are the 3 things that I'm spending my product time on, right? You get what you put into it. If you spend a third of your time trying to make the people around you better through getting better people, mentoring, getting them to be better, getting the best people in your organization who you know into more impactful roles, then I think over time that just accrues and you get a better organization.
We've had this tradition for, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years at the company, where every week we have a Q&A where our employees can come and ask me any question that they want about what's going on and what the direction of the company is, or questions or things that they read about in the press, or that their friends who use the product, what they're asking them. And it's been this really important tradition for us, both because we really believe in openness and communication, and that's kind of what Facebook is all about. But it's also really important for me and for running the company to be able to get feedback, right? And to be able to learn what's on people's minds, what our employees and folks who are part of our team are thinking about, and just kind of a lot of the time there are good questions that people ask that change the way that we think about what we're building and what we're here to do in the world, and that often make us go think and reevaluate how we should be approaching different problems.
So many things go wrong when you're starting a company, and often I think people ask, what mistakes should you avoid making? And my answer to that question is don't even bother trying to avoid mistakes, because you're going to make tons of mistakes, right? And the important thing is actually learning quickly from whatever mistakes you make and not giving up, right? And I mean, there are things every single year of Facebook's existence that could have killed us or made it so that it just seemed like moving forward and making a lot of progress just seemed intractable, but you just kind of bounce back and you learn, and nothing is impossible. You just have to kind of keep running through the walls. I don't hire people who I wouldn't work for myself. I think that's a really good heuristic, because everyone knows this, like, there's this saying like A players hire A players and B players hire C players, which is like good people hire good people. Yeah. And I don't think that that's that informative, right? Because I mean, what are you going to say? Like, to someone in your organization,
hire better
B
people.
player, you don't get to hire people. Like, I mean, no. I mean, and I think a lot of the time the problem is you don't actually know. I mean, sometimes you're like trying to figure out how good someone is. If you didn't think they were good, you wouldn't have hired them. But the heuristic of only hiring people who you would work for tends to be pretty good, I think. Because then it's like, then that right? It's like, I would not work for this person, then okay, I'm not going to like stretch just because I need to fill a role today.
Also, if you want to have unstoppable confidence and learn from billionaires, check out my 254 series. They're free. The links to join are in the description below.
The biggest risk you can take is not taking any risk.
People say that, I built Facebook or Steve Jobs built Apple or whatever, but that's really not true.
Ideas don't come out fully formed. They only become clear as you work on them. You just have to get started.
The main thing is just, when you're starting something, it's just kind of hard. You need to be pretty headstrong about it, right? And there are going to be all these challenges that come up. And I think the main thing that you need to do is just not give up, right? And kind of know what you want to do. And the best entrepreneurs who I've met don't really start companies because their goal is to build a company. They do it because they want to make a change in the world and help people. And I think if you kind of stay true to that, and if you just focus on kind of powering through no matter what the challenges are that will inevitably come up in your path, then you'll find that there are lots of tools that are available and a lot of people who will help you build what you're building.
One definition that I have for a good team is a group of people that makes better decisions as a whole than would individually make as a sum of the parts. And I think most smart people like learning, right? And I mean, that's like one of the thrills of starting a company, right? Is the learning curve can be so steep. And if you can set up a team dynamic where you're constantly learning from the people around you, then I mean, what's better, right? It's like, these are the people I wake up every morning and I want to go learn from and work from.
Is that one of your heuristics for hiring people too, to like hire people that you learn from?
Yeah. And when building a team, you want to think about the dynamics so that way you can maintain this property that the team makes better decisions as a group than any individual would.
I always kind of I get a little upset whenever any media attention focuses on me personally and me leading Facebook, much less a movie.
It's been kind of a bad year, hasn't it?
It turned out okay.
Time, Academy.
It turned out good. The Time thing was awesome. That was really flattering. But I think that it's one of these things that the media systematically gets wrong, is that this idea that it's a person, right? It's never a person, right? It's always a team. And the most important thing if you are an entrepreneur trying to build something is you need to build a really good team. And that's what I spend a lot of my time on, right? I mean, I spend probably at least 3 hours a day with our core team, right, at doing things. I spend probably 25% of my time recruiting, finding good people, both outside the company and inside the company to put in more impactful roles.
There's this inherent conflict in the system, though, which is, are we trying to optimize newsfeed to give each person, all of you guys, the best experience when you're reading? Or are we trying to help businesses just reach as many people as possible? And in every decision that we make, we optimize for the first, for making it so that for the people who we serve, who use Facebook and who are reading newsfeed, get the very best experience that they can. And that means that if a business is sharing content that's going to be useful for them, then we'll show that. But that means that if the business is sharing content that isn't going to be useful for them, we may not show that, because it's probably more important that they learn about their friend who had a baby and their baby is healthy. So that's an important guiding principle for how we think about this stuff. And as the products continue to develop, there's just going to be more people sharing more things, and we're going to continue to try to do our best at showing the best things that we can, understanding that there's no way that a person will ever take the time to go through every one of the 1,500 things that are shared with them every single day. But that's kind of how I think about organic reach. And there are a lot of pages that are doing quite successfully, and their organic reach is growing quite a bit because they're delivering content to people that they really want. So if you're a business owner and you're thinking about how to use your free page on Facebook, I would just focus on trying to publish really good content that's going to be compelling to your customers and the people who are following you.
I spent a bunch of time analyzing and reflecting on why it was that we were even able to do it, because all reasons suggest that we shouldn't have been able to do it, right? Because all these other companies had way more engineering power and servers and time and money and all this stuff. And I actually think that this is a pretty instructive thing for anything that you want to go do, because this is the same property is going to be true for anything that you guys start, is that someone else is going to have more resources and be able to do it. The reason why I think we actually ended up being the ones doing it is because we just cared way more about it than everyone else, right? So there were always projects at some of these other companies that were these hobbies, but we always thought that it was this really important thing and really just felt in our gut and our heart that we wanted to do it. And early on, there were always these skeptics saying that, oh, this can't be a business. We didn't actually care that much about it being a business early on. But a lot of the reason why bigger companies didn't invest in it was because it wasn't clear that there was a model that would work for it.
It seemed like a bad idea.
Yeah, and I actually think that that's true for a lot of the best ideas, where it is that it's not that someone else can't do it, they actually can, and the odds are stacked against you, but I think often that belief in the fact that you just care so much about what you're doing is the only thing that kind of drives you to do it. And, to be honest, that kind of drives me to this day. I mean, one of the big emphasis points for the company right now is internet.org. And, for a while we had this rallying cry of, can we connect 1 billion people? And when we started talking about that, we thought that was crazy, right? It was way bigger than any service in the world that had been built. And, it was 10 digits long, right? It's like it felt crazy. We'd never get to that. But then the thing is, as we started to actually get closer to that, we took a step back and we're like, all right, well, our mission isn't actually to get 1 in 7 people in the world to be connected. We want to connect everyone. So it's a big issue that only around 1/3 of the people in the world have access to the internet, and that's something that we think that we can do something about. And similar to early Facebook, there's no business model around this. I mean, all the people who have all the money in the world, I mean, it's not necessarily a fair thing, are already the people who are on Facebook, right? It's in the first, 1/7 of the world. But we just believe really strongly. It's like, this is what we are here to do. This is what our company cares about. I care about it. The team cares about it. Our culture cares about it. So we're just going to keep pushing on it. And I actually think a lot of the reason why great stuff gets built is because it's kind of irrational at the time. But so it kind of selects for the people who care the most about it doing it.
But the students around me were really important as well, right? And both in high school and in college, I mean, the people who started Facebook with me and a lot of the people who are still with me running the company today are people who I met when I was at Harvard. And some of them were my TFs at Harvard, right? And when the professors were off writing papers, these were the people who actually taught me, and then we hung out and we had like social bonds and academic bonds. And I wouldn't understate the importance of that. And I mean, it's very tied into my whole philosophy and the product that I spend my life building, Facebook, because we just believe that social bonds are critical. And one way that I think about the value that Facebook is filling in the world is that you go through school, and at least when I did, people just focused on academics, like achievement, different areas. And one of the things that no one really ever taught me was like having friends is really valuable. No, not that I didn't have friends, but like. Although, the movie,
yes.
I could see that.
That first girlfriend.
But for sure, I don't think anyone is like, it's not like, okay, 3rd grade, we're gonna teach you that like hanging out with people is a very important development, right? And I don't know, I actually think that is. And I think that's part of the reason why sometimes people view Facebook as a waste of time, but I actually think it's this extremely socially valuable utility. And I know that I wouldn't be where I am today without that aspect of my life being as developed as the academic part.
Ideas don't come out fully formed. They only become clear as you work on them. You just have to get started. If I had to know everything about connecting people before I got started, I never would have built Facebook. Movies and pop culture just get this all wrong. The idea of a single eureka moment is a dangerous lie. It makes us feel inadequate because we feel like we haven't had ours yet. And it prevents people with seeds of good ideas from ever getting started in the first place.
In a world that's changing so quickly, the biggest risk you can take is not taking any risk. And I really think that that's true, right? I mean, a lot of people, I think that, whenever it comes to, whenever you get yourself into a position where you have to make some big shift in direction or do something, there are always, people are going to point to the downside risks of that decision. And locally, they're maybe right? I mean, for any given decision that you're going to make, there's upside and downside. But in aggregate, if you are stagnant and you don't make those changes, then I think you're guaranteed to fail, right? And not catch up. So to some degree, I think it's really right that over time, the biggest risk that you can take is to not take any risks.
It wasn't so long ago that, I was a student and, sitting in a seat in an auditorium like you guys are here today, listening to, I remember very specifically this time when Bill Gates came to talk at Harvard, and I was just like, wow, how do you do that? But the trick is that the media likes to sensationalize this as if you have some eureka moment or you are some singular person who can build something on your own, and that's just not how the world works. When I was in school, I built a lot of stuff that I just liked building. There was not a single moment when I had some revelation that Facebook was going to be awesome. That's not maybe how the media or movies or whatever would like to portray things. It's much less exciting. But the reality is, I think most services in the world that reach the scale that Facebook has, you start off building something that you care about, and you don't necessarily think it's going to be that big. I didn't. I built Facebook, the first version of Facebook, for my college community because I wanted to be able to connect with the people at my school. And I remember very clearly talking to my friends at the time and saying, how cool is it that we have built this community for our school? One day it's going to be awesome when somebody else builds this for the world because something like this needs to exist for the world. But it didn't even occur to me that, my friends and I might be able to play a role in doing that, right? Because we were college students, right? I mean, we didn't have any, engineers to work with or servers or resources or anything like that. And, there were these huge companies that deliver products for hundreds of millions of people, right? I always assumed that it was going to be like Microsoft or Google or someone would build this for the world. And what basically just happened is at each step along the way, we just kind of kept doing the next thing and growing from there. And there were teams inside these other companies that thought social media was important and were working on it. But there were all these different memes and narratives in the world. People would say, oh, well, this is just a fad. People are going to use it, but then they're going to stop. So, so a lot of the teams who were working on didn't take it that seriously, or the higher ups in those companies didn't care, so they didn't get resources, and we just kept going and going. And then people would say, all right, fine. So maybe people are using it, but it's never going to make any money, right? I mean, social media doesn't make any money. And we just kind of kept going and going, and then pretty soon we had a service that was bigger than any of these other ones, and that kind of is how we are here where we are. There's no magic. A lot of times I think people just get afraid because often your dream is it seems like it's so far off, but if you just kind of focus on building stuff that you think is good and you keep on going at each step along the way and don't let people deter you from that, and you just really care about what you're doing and kind of don't give up at each step along the way, then I think that's how you build something good.
It's really good to be idealistic, but be prepared to be misunderstood. Anyone working on a big vision is going to get called crazy, even if you end up right. Anyone taking on a complex problem is going to get blamed for not fully understanding it, even though it's impossible to know everything up front. Anyone taking initiative will always get criticized for moving too fast because there's always someone who wants to slow you down.
There are probably a lot of people who can run Microsoft and do a reasonable job. When I was growing up, Bill Gates was my hero.
Oh, come on.
Yes.
He's like Darth Vader. He's not Luke Skywalker.
No.
He's the bad guy.
No, he is not. Bill Gates ran one of the most mission-driven companies that I can think of. Right? And right now I think Microsoft, their mission is less focused than it used to be. But when I was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up, Microsoft I thought had a great mission. Put a computer on every desktop and in every office, right? Or maybe it was every desktop in every home. There are companies that define themselves by a way of doing things, right? I mean, there's like the HP way that I was talking about, and there are companies that define themselves by making a concrete change in the world. And Microsoft did that. And I have a huge amount of respect for him for doing that. And he pushed them, and it was an incredibly inspiring company during the time that he was doing that. I think that they still are doing a lot of things, but I think that they've lost some of the focus. And I don't know. I mean, I think he's like one of the greatest visionaries that our industry has ever had.
I built the first version of Facebook because it's something that my friends and I wanted to use at Harvard, a directory and a way to connect with the other people around us. And I didn't think at all that it was going to be a company. I remember very specifically the night that we launched the first version. I went out to get pizza with a couple of my friends who now work here, and I remember really clearly we were talking about how one day we thought that someone was going to build a community like this for the world, and that would be some company. But it clearly wasn't going to be us. I mean, it wasn't even.
It didn't even occur.
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't even an option that we considered that it might be us. I mean, we just weren't focused on building a company back then. We were just building something that we thought would be useful at our school. With Facebook, there was just such, people loved it, right? And had such an intensity of using it. I think within a couple of weeks, 2/3 of students at Harvard were using it. And all these other students at MIT and other local universities were writing in asking us if we could open up Facebook at their school. So we kind of just followed that, right? And, again, I didn't set out, and, my roommates didn't set out to build a service that we were going to turn into a company, but we just kind of followed what people wanted, and that led us to expand it to all these other schools and eventually beyond schools, and to, at some point, once we'd hired a bunch of people, we decided to turn it into a company and go for this mission of connecting the world. But that's not where we started. I always think that you should start with the problem that you're trying to solve in the world, and not start with deciding that you want to build a company. Right? I mean, the best companies that get built are things that are trying to drive some kind of social change, even if it's just local in one place. More than starting out because you want to make a bunch of money or have a lot of people working for you or build some company in some way. So, I always think that this is kind of a perverse thing about Silicon Valley in a way, which is that, people decide often that they want to start a company before they even decide what they want to do. And that just feels really backwards to me. And, for anyone who's had the experience of actually building a company, that you go through some really hard things along the way. And I think part of what gets you through that is believing in what you're doing and knowing that what you're doing is really delivering a lot of value for people. And that's, I think, how the best companies end up getting made.
I think the media, there's a little bit of this cultural bias towards thinking that, one person does this, right? I mean, people say that, I built Facebook or Steve Jobs built Apple or whatever, but, that's really not true, right? I mean, we're people, we helped, but there were thousands and thousands of other people involved in building these things. And the reality is that as strong as any one individual is, no one person can deal with all the challenges that are going to get thrown at them in anything that you do. And one of the ways that I think we maintain resilience is by having co-founders and partners who complement our strengths and fortify our weaknesses and can kind of encourage us and give us a push to keep going when things are tough. And there's actually a lot of data on this that suggests that companies that get started with more co-founders are more likely to be successful. And it isn't quite clear exactly from that data why that's the case, although it is very clear in terms of the outcome for the startups that it is the case. But I would guess that the reason why that's the case is because of this resilience point, where people who start something by themselves, I just think there's no way that any one person can overcome all of the different things that you need to do to build a startup or take on any kind of other project in the world. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 partners, then I don't know. I mean, maybe over time, one of them doesn't like it and drops out, but you still have enough strength on the team to power through all the challenges that you have, and that's kind of how you go. And at Facebook today, one of the things that I always find a little bit funny is, again, that so much attention is placed on me as the person running the company, whereas I think, people like Cheryl, who really, is my partner running the whole business, or, folks like Chris Cox, who run a huge amount of our product, or Mike Schrepfer, who's our chief technology officer and kind of make sure that a ton of what we're doing works, or Jay Parikh, who, runs all of our global infrastructure and all the data centers around the world. We couldn't make Facebook work without those people. Right? And there were really hard days where I'm not sure what to do next, and they keep me going.
We've made a huge number of mistakes along the way. Right now, I always say, I just think we've made probably every possible mistake you could make.
Is there a decision that you've made that the people around you told you was a mistake, and you defied them, and you were right?
The most famous one, I think, probably has to do with selling the company, right? I mean, in 2006, we had this opportunity to sell the company to Yahoo for $1 billion, and we turned that down. I think a lot of people at the time thought that we should sell the company.
Absolutely.
But, I felt really strongly, and I think now people generally think that was a good decision. A lot of people who I think build startups or companies think that selling the company or going public is this endpoint, right? It's you win when you go public. And
that's just not how I see it. Today, I want to talk about purpose. But I'm not here to give you the standard commencement about finding your purpose. We're millennials. We try to do that instinctively. Instead, I'm here to tell you that finding your purpose isn't enough. The challenge for our generation is to create a world where everyone has a sense of purpose. One of my favorite stories is when JFK went to go visit the NASA Space Center, and he saw a janitor holding a broom, and he asked him what he was doing, and the janitor replied, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." Purpose is that feeling that you are a part of something bigger than yourself, that you are needed, and that you have something better ahead to work for. Purpose is what creates true happiness. I remember that night I launched Facebook from that little dorm in Kirkland House. I went to Noakes with my friend KX, and I remember telling him clearly that I was excited to help connect the Harvard community, but one day someone would connect the whole world. The thing is, it never even occurred to me that that someone might be us. We were just college kids. We didn't know anything about that. There were all these great big technology companies with all these resources, and I just assumed one of them would do it. But this idea was so clear to us that all people want to connect. So we just kept working on it, day after day after day. And I know that a lot of you are going to have your own stories just like this. A change in the world that seems so clear that you are sure someone else is going to do it. But they're not. You will. But it's not enough to have that purpose yourself. You also have to create a sense of purpose for others. Maybe you're asking yourself, can I really do this? Well, remember when I told you about that class I taught at the Boys and Girls Club? One day after class, I was talking to my students about going to college, and one of my top students raised his hand and said that he wasn't sure he could go to college because he's undocumented. He wasn't sure if they'd take him. Last year, I took him out to breakfast for his birthday, and I wanted to get him a gift, so I asked him what he wanted, and he just started talking about struggles that he saw other students in his class facing, and finally he said, "You know, I'd really just like a book on social justice." I was blown away. Here is a young guy who has every reason to be cynical. He wasn't sure if the country he calls home, the only one he's known, was going to deny him his dream of going to college. But he wasn't feeling sorry for himself. He wasn't even thinking of himself. He has a greater sense of purpose, and he's going to bring people along with him. It says something about our situation today that I can't even say his name because I don't want to put him at risk. But if a high school senior who doesn't know what the future holds for him can do his part to move the world forward, then we owe it to the world to do our part too. Back at Harvard, I am outside of my old dorm room, and this desk, minus the poster in the background, that is not my poster, and I would not have had a poster that cool. This is where my desk was, and this is where I programmed Facebook for. It took me about 2 weeks to program to code the first version of this. It was a very simple version that I launched in February of 2004. So I'm probably never going to be back here again in this specific room. But this has been a place where a lot of really special things happen in my life, and I'm really grateful to this place. To me, entrepreneurship is about creating change, not just creating companies. And the most effective entrepreneurs who I've met care deeply about some mission and some change that they're trying to create, and often they don't even start because they're trying to create a company, right? And that's how I think about my connection to all of us here is, when I was getting started, I cared deeply about giving everyone a voice, right? And giving people the tools to share everything that they cared about, and bringing a community together. And it started small in one university, and I didn't think it was going to be a company at the time. As a matter of fact, I was pretty convinced that at some point someone would build something like this for the world, but I thought that would be some other company that already had thousands of engineers and was used to building stuff for hundreds of millions of people around the world. And what ended up happening was that no one built it, right? So we just kind of kept on going, right? I mean, people said at each step along the way, what you're doing, all right, maybe college students like it, but no one else is going to like it. And there's not going to be any money in doing this. So, all right, so you only really do it if you care, right? If you're passionate about doing it. And then it started growing, and people said it would be a fad and it would never be a good business. But you keep going because you care, not because you're trying to create a business. Then there's the shift to mobile, where people thought that it wouldn't be a sustainable business. And through each of these things, the entrepreneurs who I think build things that last for a long time keep going because they care fundamentally about the change that they're trying to create in the world. And they're not in it just to build a company.
Steve Jobs cared a little bit too much about how perfect the edges of some polygon were, right? What is it that you care too much about?
Connecting everyone. No, seriously. If you think about, it's like this aesthetic sense of the world that I have is that communities of people can channel their energy to do great things, and having connections between people is the infrastructure for the world to do that. And that's why at each step along the way, when there was always all this uncertainty about, whether it would be profitable or whether it would make sense or be good or whatever, to do these things, we always were doing it because we just cared more. And to this day, you could say that was a startup thing, but it isn't, because now we're here and we connect more than 1 billion people. But we're pouring tons of money and resources into connecting people who can't even afford internet access, right? So that's like, there's no way that that's going to be profitable in the near term or medium term, but we're doing it because we think it's the right thing to do. And over the long term, I do think that there's something there, and it's going to be fundamentally important for the world. And maybe we'll get rewarded, maybe not, but we just really care.
We had a very simple focus and idea. The goal wasn't to make a huge community site. It was to make something where you could type in someone's name and find out a bunch of information about them. So, I don't know, I took a few days. I just threw together Facebook and launched it on February 4th, 2004. It was just me working on it at that time. But at that point, my roommate, Dustin, who hadn't had much computer programming experience at all, was like, I can help you expand it. And I'm like, that's cool, dude, but you don't know how to program. So he's like, no, it's not an issue. And he went home one weekend, bought the book Perl for Dummies, came back and was like, all right, I'm ready. And then we started getting emails from people at a bunch of other schools asking if we could launch Facebooks there. In the last tech bubble, most websites were run using these really expensive machines, which made it that you had to basically go and raise money before you could do anything. We ran the site originally for $85 a month, renting computers for the first 3 months.
Were you ever in debt?
I was in debt $160.
Getting transparency inside a company is really critical. But if the people running the company don't have a sense of what all of the people around the company are worried about, then you're not going to be able to run the company as best as possible. And so that's why I do things like every week I run an open Q&A. And it's that way anyone can come and ask me any question. But it's not only that. We try to make it so that we encourage people to ask the hardest possible questions. We create a poll in advance, and people can submit questions and people can vote on them, and they can do that anonymously. So that way I can make sure every week that I know what the top issues are that people are worried about inside the company, and so that I can address that. And we certainly have a pretty flat management culture. We're not generally very hierarchical. I talk to a lot of product managers and engineers and just go through many layers of management because I want to hear what's going on. And that's how we try to operate the company. And I think that that's very important. I kind of think about what we're doing today very similarly to how I thought about where we were at the beginning. I get people all the time who come to me and say, all right, well, you're investing billions of dollars in trying to put internet connectivity in places where we don't get paid for it. It's not something that we'll make any money from for a very long period of time if it works out. But it's this deep belief
that you're trying to make a change, you're trying to connect people in the world, and I really do believe that if you do something good, and if you help people out, then eventually some portion of that good will come back to you. And you may not know up front what it's going to be, but that's just been the guiding principle for me in the work that we've done.
You know, companies are not about any one person, right? It's really not about any two people either. They're these combinations of people and teams, and I think the ones that work best are when you have people who have different strengths who complement each other. And I think a huge part of the success of Facebook and our ability to grow the community has been because of the partnership that we've built, and a number of other really special people here who are on the core group who just each have different skills and are very different and are not afraid to challenge each other and bring their voice to the table. And I think that's a special thing.
There's this culture in Silicon Valley that kind of makes startups seem glamorous. And I never really believed that, right? I never had a goal of starting a startup. And my goal when I realized that I had a company was to get it to be a good company as quickly as possible, right? And kind of get out of what you'd call the like risky startup phase where you are just like constantly about to die, and where you could get to a point where you can actually like do some interesting things and make a lot more interesting bets. And so I don't know, I never read a lot of the literature on this. And I mean, maybe if I had, then I wouldn't have made so many mistakes. So I don't know if learning from me is the right way to go on this. But I mean, but it did, I think
your model must have come from somewhere, though, even if it was unintentional, right? Like, were you influenced by Peter Thiel or Sean?
Well, yes,
Parker,
I was influenced by all
met?
these people once I met them. I hadn't really heard of Peter Thiel before.
I'm
Sean
talking about, like,
me.
yeah, right.
Yeah, but I mean, he was massively influential on my thinking, right? I mean, like a lot of the early lessons that I took on how to think about strategy came from Peter and Sean. And I did pay a lot of attention when I was growing up to Microsoft. I grew up, using, Windows 3.1 and then Windows 95, and I just thought that those were like the most unbelievable things. And
in a sense, they are.
Yeah, they really were awesome, right? Well, I don't know if you meant that positively, but I did. And I thought, building this ecosystem was really neat, and that kind of inspired me, right? In the way that they built a platform, I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe one day, the tools that I'm building can be part of a broader ecosystem as well.
Facebook is a for-profit company. Why call it .org? Is this a nonprofit? Is this charity?
If we were primarily focused on profits, the most reasonable thing for us to do would be to really just focus on the first billion people who are using our products. I mean, the world isn't set up equally, and the first billion people who are using Facebook have way more money than the rest of the world combined. So from a business perspective, it actually doesn't make a huge amount of sense for us to put the emphasis in this that we are right now. The reason why we're doing it is two things. One is mission, right? I mean, we're here to help connect the world, and we take that really seriously. And to some degree, you can't really do that if 2/3 of the world doesn't even have access to the internet. So, we just turned 10 as a company. And we decided that in our next 10 years, we want to take on some really big challenges in the world, like helping everyone get online. And that's just an important thing for us, and I think for a lot of other internet companies, and fulfilling this mission overall. Now, over the long term, I do think it could be good for our company as well, if you look at it in a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon, because a lot of these countries and economies will develop, and over time, they will be important.
But if we've given the world a voice, look at what's happened in the last year. You've had elections in the last years, elections manipulated, hate speech that's gone viral and turned offline. It certainly seems like this mission has been accomplished in many ways, and there's a whole new set of problems that perhaps you guys didn't foresee. And now we're in a very complicated place where there's not an easy solution.
Yeah, these are complex issues that you can't fix. You manage them on an ongoing basis. But look, do you think that the world is better with everyone having a voice and having the ability to express their opinion and being able to connect to who they want? I don't think we're going back to a world where there were just a handful of gatekeepers who got to control what ideas get expressed.
But Facebook's a new gatekeeper.
And even if we could, well, I'm trying to make it so that we're not. I mean, that's why making it so that we're building these independent governance mechanisms and things like that are really important, and that's work that I really care about. But I think that the world will keep on moving in this direction. More people will keep on getting a voice. I think that that's good, and I think there are certainly going to be issues that we need to work through over time. But I think that while we are doing that, we can't lose sight of all of the really positive things that are happening here as well. Not just in terms of communities and people being able to connect with groups that are really meaningful to them, whether it's around a disease or a community around veterans that they wouldn't be able to connect to otherwise. But even if you just think about the economic impact of what we're doing, we serve 80 million small businesses around the world. About half of them have told us that they're hiring people because of using our tools. And that without Facebook and the tools that we provide, that their business would be significantly smaller and they wouldn't be hiring as many people as they are. So, a study came out. The U.S. economy added about 4.5 million jobs over the last year. If you just look at what people are telling us, the small businesses who use our tools, we've directly been able to contribute to creating many more jobs than that across the world. So I think that this is the power of giving people a voice, giving small businesses, giving communities, giving everyone everywhere the ability to connect with the people who they care about and get their opinion across, and giving everyday people the power that previously only big companies would have had. So that's it. The world is going to go more in that direction, and I think by and large that's a good thing. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing on this. And there are big issues, and I'm not trying to say that there aren't, that we need to work through. But I do think that sometimes you can get the flavor from a lot of this, from some of the coverage that that's all there is. And I don't think that that's right either. We need to make sure that we address these questions. These are really big and important things for the future of our society and the future of the internet. But we also need to keep pushing in the direction of empowering more people, because that's good.
You kind of need to remind yourself that you need to focus and try not to let stuff bother you as much as possible. But it is going to bother you because you're human, and I was human. I am human still. But I was just referring to myself in the past. Not that I was not human.
One of the crazy things when you do these live Q&As is some of them are very silly. So we got one. Mark, are the allegations true that you are secretly a lizard? I'm gonna have to go with no on that. I am not a lizard. But keep the high quality comments coming in, please. This is surely on track to be a great live Q&A if we continue getting stuff at that level of quality.
There's probably stuff you can say about some insight that you had early on and you thought to yourself, nobody else knows this except us. But we have this great trick. Do you remember any of them?
Well, Peter Thiel was really focused on network effects. And he had this model that I think is right for making decisions that as the complexity of the company grows, every day you're going to be faced with 100 things that you could potentially go do. And your job is to pick the one thing that actually matters. Because out of those 100 things, it's really only actually going to be 1 or 2 things that actually matter. And that was pretty informative to me at the time, because I had intuitively, I had a lot of some self-direction intuitively, but as soon as I started getting all these people around me who all had reasonable perspectives on things, it was very hard for me to balance that. And Peter was always very useful for that. We were focused.
He was good at saying, here's the one thing that matters. Focus on the one thing that matters.
Well, partially that, and partially just the meta lesson of figure out the one thing that matters and do that. But
do you remember what the one thing that mattered? If someone had asked
connecting everyone as quickly as possible. Because network effects were a massively important part of this. One of the stories.
So when you say connecting everyone as quickly as possible, you don't mean specifically getting more signups. You mean getting people to friend one another faster.
Yeah. Well,
how did you do that?
Well, we built a lot of tools to enable people to do what they already wanted to. Where you can't push uphill on this stuff, right? We were solving a problem that people had, and we just needed to remove as much friction as possible.
Throughout building Facebook, there have been lots of challenges, and there are all these times where, in anything you do, where you're really going to be pushed and you feel like you want to give up or something like that. And this gets back to, I was talking a second ago about how I think the media, there's a little bit of this cultural bias towards thinking that, one person does this, right? People say that, I built Facebook or Steve Jobs built Apple or whatever, but, that's really not true, right? We're people, we helped, but there were thousands and thousands of other people involved in building these things. And the reality is that as strong as any one individual is, no one person can deal with all the challenges that are going to get thrown at them in anything that you do. And one of the ways that I think we maintain resilience is by having co-founders and partners who complement our strengths and fortify our weaknesses and can kind of encourage us and give us a push to keep going when things are tough. And there's actually a lot of data on this that suggests that companies that get started with more co-founders are more likely to be successful. And it isn't quite clear exactly from that data why that's the case, although it is very clear in terms of the outcome for the startups that it is the case. But I would guess that the reason why that's the case is because of this resilience point, where people who start something by themselves, I just think like there's no way that any one person can overcome all of the different things that you need to do to build a startup or take on any kind of other project in the world. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 partners, then I don't know. I mean, maybe over time, one of them doesn't like it and drops out, but you still have enough strength on the team to power through all the challenges that you have, and that's kind of how you go.
Companies are learning organisms, and you can make decisions that either make it so that you learn faster or you learn slower. And, you know, in a lot of ways, building a company is like following the scientific method, right? You try a bunch of different hypotheses, and if you set up the experiments well, then you kind of learn what to do. And I think that's an important philosophy. So there are all these different decisions that we make inside the company, you know, everything down to really empowering individual engineers. We invest in this huge testing framework, right? At any given point in time, there's not just one version of Facebook running in the world, right? There's probably tens of thousands of versions running because engineers here have the power to try out an idea and ship it to, you know, maybe 10,000 people or 100,000 people. And then they get a readout on how that version of what they did, whether it was a change to, you know, show better content in newsfeed or UI change or some new feature, they get a readout on how that version performed compared to the baseline version of Facebook that we have on everything that we care about, how connected people are, you know, how much people are sharing and how much they say that they're finding meaningful content, business metrics like how much revenue we make and engagement of the overall community. And, you know, by running tens of thousands of different experiments and putting the power in people's hands to try all these different things, you can imagine we just make so much more progress than we could if every change had to be approved by me, right? Or every idea had to come from management. So I do think that there's something very deep about building this, you know, learning culture and moving quickly towards that just helps you get ahead over time.
Take me inside Mark Zuckerberg's head to like the moment that you decided you needed to change Facebook's core mission. Was there an event that happened, or was there just a moment that you said, we got to change something?
Well, for most of the last 10 years, this idea that the world should be more connected was not very controversial. Right, and now I think there are starting to be some people who question whether that is good. So just been this evolution where for me and for a lot of the people I work with at Facebook, you know, we feel like giving people a voice is a really important thing to do, but it's not enough to just give people a voice. You also have to, you know, help build common ground, right? So that way people can move forward together and aren't just, you know, sharing a lot of different opinions, but you actually have to help reconcile that. So that way people can come together as well. And, you know, that's a lot of the responsibility that we feel now and the mission that we want to take on for the next 10 years of the company.
We keep hearing we've never been more divided, we've never been more polarized. Was it the political climate that led to kind of this awakening?
I think it's really this feeling that simply connecting the world is not enough by itself, that you also have to work and do proactive work to help bring people closer together, right? So you need to give people a voice so we can get a diversity of opinions out there, but you also need to do work to help build enough common ground so that way we can make progress as a society together, right? You want to help people stay connected with the people they already know and care about, but you also want to make it so that people get access to new people and new perspectives too. So we're going to keep on doing everything that we were doing before to connect friends and family and to help people share. But now we also want to help people build communities, right? And other ways that they can connect and help people bond and come together and spread tolerance and a lot of the values that I think we all want to see in the world.
One of the things that I think we've done well is just given the people at the company a lot of opportunity, right? So, it's not just me who started when I was 19 and now, I'm running this big company. There were a number of people who joined who were, people I did problem sets with at Harvard, or they dropped out of Stanford, or, different programs who have grown with the company over this long period of time. And, one of the things that I'm the most proud of is we have about 12 different product groups at the company. And all of the people who are running them, with the exception of one, did not join the company running a product group or reporting to me.
That's amazing.
And the one exception is David Marcus, who was the CEO of a $50 billion public company. So, so I'm pretty happy that he's on board, and having him run a product group, I think, is a pretty big coup too. But literally, none of them started off reporting to me. They all started off in different roles. Some were engineers, some were data analysts, some were product managers, and they've all grown. But I think what happens is, people see that you create opportunities for people, and that also, I think, keeps the best people engaged and makes the best people want to come work at your company because they feel like, oh, I'm going to get those kind of opportunities too.
No matter what you do, you're going to make a ton of mistakes, right? And I made every mistake I think you could probably make. I mean, mistakes in how to set up the company, mistakes in hiring, product mistakes, technical mistakes, anything you can kind of think about doing wrong. I have probably made that mistake in trying to kind of build Facebook up, right? I mean, and it kind of makes sense. I was a college student when I got started, right? I mean, I didn't know anything about business or hiring. No one is born with these skills, right? So you learn them the same way that you learn everything else, right? Trial and error. You do it. You don't be too afraid to make mistakes, and you do make mistakes, and you recover and you keep going. The thing that I think is really what you should focus on is not what is the mistake that you should avoid, but instead, if you do something good, you get the strength to power through a lot of mistakes.
How have you hired your team, and what do you look for when you bring people on?
If you think about it, I started the company when I was 19, right? So I can't institutionally believe that experience is that important, right? Or else I would have a hard time reconciling, myself, right? And the company. So, we invest in people who we think are just really talented, even if they haven't done that thing before. And, that applies to people who are fresh out of university, as well as, people like, the CFO who took the company public, had not taken a company public before, right? And a lot of his background was in, production, development at Genentech before. So, just focus on really talented people.
Here's the thing. It wasn't so long ago that, I was a student and, sitting in a seat in an auditorium like you guys are here today, listening to, I remember very specifically this time when Bill Gates came to talk at Harvard, and I was just like, wow, how do you do that? But the trick is that the media likes to sensationalize this as if you have some eureka moment, or you are some singular person who can build something on your own, and that's just not how the world works. When I was in school, I built a lot of stuff that I just liked building. There was not a single moment when I had some revelation that Facebook was going to be awesome. That's not maybe how the media or movies or whatever would like to portray things. It's much less exciting. But the reality is, I think most services in the world that reach the scale that Facebook has, you start off building something that you care about, and you don't necessarily think it's going to be that big. I didn't. I built Facebook, the first version of Facebook, for my college community because I wanted to be able to connect with the people at my school. And I remember very clearly talking to my friends at the time and saying, how cool is it that we have built this community for our school? One day it's going to be awesome when somebody else builds this for the world, because something like this needs to exist for the world. But it didn't even occur to me that, my friends and I might be able to play a role in doing that, right? Because we were college students, right? I mean, we didn't have any, engineers to work with, or servers or resources or anything like that. And,
there are these huge companies that deliver products for hundreds of millions of people, right? I always assumed that it was going to be like Microsoft or Google or someone would build this for the world. And what basically just happened is at each step along the way, we just kind of kept doing the next thing and growing from there. And there were teams inside these other companies that thought social media was important and were working on it. But there were all these different memes and narratives in the world. People would say, oh, well, this is just a fad. People are going to use it, but then they're going to stop. So, so a lot of the teams who were working on didn't take it that seriously, or, the higher ups in those companies didn't care, so they didn't get resources, and we just kept going and going. And then people would say, all right, fine. So maybe people are using it, but it's never going to make any money, right? I mean, social media doesn't make any money. And we just kind of kept going and going, and then pretty soon we had a service that was bigger than any of these other ones, and that kind of is how we are here where we are.
When I was growing up, one of the big things that I think that the internet enables is for people to connect with groups of people who share their real values and interests. And it wasn't always like this, right? Before the internet, you were really tied to your physical location. And I just think about how when I was growing up, I grew up in a town of about 10,000 people, and there were only so many different clubs or activities that you could do. So I grew up, like a lot of the other kids, playing Little League baseball. And I kind of think about this in retrospect. It's like, I'm not really into baseball. I'm not really an athlete. So why did I play Little League when my real passion was programming computers? And the reality was that growing up, there was no one else really in my town who was into programming computers, so I didn't have a peer group or a club that I could do that. It wasn't until I went to boarding school and then later college where I actually was able to meet people who were into the same things as I am. And now I think with the internet, that's starting to change, right? And now you have the ability to not just be tethered to your physical location, but to find people who have more niche interests and different kind of subcultures and communities on the internet, which I think is a really powerful thing.
Well, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
If I'm emailing within WhatsApp, does that ever inform your advertisers?
No, we don't see any of the content in WhatsApp. It's fully encrypted.
Right, but is there some algorithm that spits out some information to your ad platform, and then let's say I'm emailing about Black Panther within WhatsApp? Do I get a Black Panther banner ad?
Senator, Facebook systems do not see the content of messages being transferred over WhatsApp.
Yeah, I know, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about whether these systems talk to each other without a human being touching it.
Senator, I think the answer to your specific question is if you message someone about Black Panther on WhatsApp, it would not inform any ads.
Okay.
There have been reports that Facebook can track a user's internet browsing activity even after that user has logged off of the Facebook platform. Can you confirm whether or not this is true?
Senator, I want to make sure I get this accurate, so it would probably be better to have my team follow up.
So you don't know?
I know that people use cookies on the internet, and that you can probably correlate activity between sessions. We do that for a number of reasons, including security and including measuring ads to make sure that the ad experiences are the most effective, which, of course, people can opt out of.
Will Facebook offer to all of its users a blanket opt-in to share their privacy data with any third-party users?
Congresswoman, yes, that's how our platform works. You have to opt in to sign into any app before you use it.
Could somebody call you up and say, I want to see John Kennedy's file?
Absolutely not.
Could you, would you do it? Could you do it?
In theory.
Do you have the right to put my data, a name on my data, and share it with somebody?
I do not believe we have the right to do that.
Do you have the ability?
Senator, the data is in the system.
Do you have the ability?
Technically, I think someone could do that, but that would be a massive breach. So we would never do that.
I remember distinctly, I had this one friend who I went and got pizza with almost every night. We did all our computer science problem sets together at Harvard. And at the time, I remember talking to him about how I was working on this Facebook thing, and I thought it would be cool for Harvard, and I really was excited about it because I wanted to use it. But at the same time, how I thought that over time, someone would definitely go build this version of this for the world, but it wasn't going to be us. It was going to be, Microsoft or someone who built software for hundreds of millions of people. It's like, who were we? We're college students, right? We're not qualified in any way to build this. And I think a lot of my takeaway from that was that we just kind of cared more than those other companies about making it exist. This is a story that I haven't told publicly and very few people know, but early on in our history, before things were really going well and we had hit a tough patch and a lot of people wanted to buy Facebook and thought we should sell the company, I went and I saw one of my mentors, Steve Jobs, and he told me that in order to reconnect with what I believed as the mission of the company, I should visit this temple that he had gone to in India early on in his evolution of thinking about what he wanted Apple and his vision of the future to be. And so I went and I traveled for almost a month, and seeing the people, seeing how people connected, and having the opportunity to feel how much better the world could be if everyone had a stronger ability to connect, reinforced for me the importance of what we were doing. And that is something that I've always remembered over the last 10 years as we've built Facebook.
Recently, you shared in a press conference that one of Facebook's focuses for the next decade is that it is more important to be understood than be liked. Will you just share what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be real here. I'm not like, communicating is not my best thing, right? I came out here, I've been planning for this, I'm excited about it, and then I messed up the name of our data center within 30 seconds. So I mean, look, when I got started with Facebook, I was 19. And there were so many parts about building a company that I didn't know, right? I didn't know anything about hiring or managing or building a company, and I certainly didn't really know that much about how to communicate about what we were doing with the world. I mean, I'm an engineer by training, right? I love coding. I like building products. That's kind of the background. My experience, kind of growing up and running the company is, went out, talked about what we did, say some stupid things, get called out for it, and get kind of go into a shell, right? And end up being really cautious about how we communicate. So, it worked out okay for a while for the company because we built products that a lot of people really like, and we weren't winning because we were communicating well. We were winning because the products were working well, I think, in spite of the fact that we were communicating quite poorly about what we were doing. But broadly speaking, for a long time, the basic approach was, okay, let's try to not do anything that's going to be too offensive. Right, and we'll kind of explain what we're doing in broad strokes and talk about the mission of what we're doing, which is something that I really believe in, helping to build community and bring people closer together. But I think we just shied away for a long time talking about some of the things that, some of the principles that we believe in that are increasingly controversial in the world. And I just think that we, for one, don't have that luxury anymore. For two, I think that kind of led for a while to a sentiment towards the company that was positive but fairly shallow. Because if you're not kind of out there standing for things that people care about, then it's not possible for people to feel that strongly about what you're doing. But so now, I've tried to change our approach more recently. I went out and in Georgetown last year, I gave this speech around our principles around free expression. And that's just one of the areas that I really feel like is under attack right now.
What do you think the three keys to your success are?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to those values, right? I mean, the values often come from the founder, the person running the company. So I think I believe those things probably the most strongly of people at the company.
Move fast.
Move fast, be bold, right?
focus on impact. I mean, I think, I think long-term focus is a really important part of this. Right? And we've had a lot of opportunities to optimize for the shorter term, whether it's in selling the company or in doing different products that would have benefited us in the short term, but not optimized for the long-term impact. And I just think, opportunities like this don't come around that often. So when you get one, I feel like you almost have a duty to see it through and build it to be what it can be.
Do you remember how much your first server cost? You said you were...
$85.
$85?
Yeah, and I remember that because that was the gating factor for us launching new schools. I mean, we had this philosophy from the very beginning that we didn't want to be this project. It wasn't even a company at the very beginning, but we didn't want to be burning a lot of money, right? We weren't planning on raising a lot of money. We didn't want to be one of these things that raised a bunch of money and, was losing a bunch of money and then decided that we'd somehow pull it through at the end. And so $85 for the first server, put ads on the site. And the ads at the beginning were, we just were running some kind of ad network, and they
Do you remember what the first ad was?
No, I don't. I don't.
How did you get ads?
This was Eduardo's job early on.
He was your ad sales guy.
He basically he was responsible for making sure that we had enough money to keep things running in the beginning. And but basically, so server was $85, and Dustin and I basically worked on kind of efficiency and making sure that we can fit more schools onto each server, and Eduardo worked on selling more ads or making a deal so that we can get an ad network, so that way we can make more money. But then whenever we had more money, we rented another $85 a month server, and we kind of went from there. And I don't know, it's just an interesting way of scaling.
So you never spent money you didn't have in the beginning?
Not in the beginning. No, and then, even
that was the constraint on your growth rate? How many new $85s you could get?
Yeah, and it was actually good because, sometimes it's really nice to have the time to get your product to be awesome and deal with scaling problems. And one of the things that was interesting was, at the time, I don't know how many people remember this, but Friendster was the service that had massive scaling problems. And, the idea was they grew quickly and it was really hard for them to scale. And, the fact that we could kind of go college by college and kind of optimize the service and make it more efficient and offer new features, but make sure that they worked, I think was really key. I mean, you're talking about people who had never built a company before. We'd never built any large scale software or anything. So having that period where we could just bake it, and people these days like to talk about how these services grow super quickly. And Facebook did grow quickly, but I think it took a year for us to get 1 million users. And we thought that was incredibly fast, but and I think it is, but it wasn't as quick as a lot of things grow today. And I think actually having that time to bake it was really valuable for us.
The hardest thing for me early on was, because I just started off as, I was an engineer, or I wasn't even really an engineer as a student, right? I thought I was going to be an engineer when I graduated, and when you're building something yourself, you kind of have all the meetings in your head, right? It's like you don't need to articulate the principles so clearly. It's like you kind of can make all the trade-offs on everything from architecture to product to marketing to just all these things, and you're kind of you have the context to trade this off, and I think it's really easy when you start building something to underestimate how much context you need to put out there and how clear you need to be about what you're trying to do. So, most of my mistakes early on in building the company were about not being clear enough internally about what we were trying to do. I mean, there's this very famous episode where like in 2006, a couple years into building the company, Yahoo tried to buy us. And so they offered a ton of money, and a lot of the people who I'd hired at the point, they were kind of experienced technology executives, and this was like all of their startup dream come true, right? They joined, and then within a year or a few months, like the company had the opportunity to exit for this large amount of money, and I really failed through that period to communicate what we were trying to do and what we stood for. And in the absence of that context, then of course it was a rational thing for people to think that this was like a good outcome for us to have.
We have a culture that's very focused on being very focused on what we're building. So focus is a really important part of it.
But which it wasn't at Google for a long time. Now it seems to be in vogue. So they may be saying, the focus is better.
But at the same time, we want to make sure that everyone can come and add their ideas. I mean, some of the best ideas throughout the company's evolution, they have just been from just places all throughout the company, whether it's an engineer or someone on the customer support team, or just different areas around the company. So we've always had these hackathons, right, that are basically time that we allocate, that the only rules that you don't work on what you work on the rest of the time. And it's basically an incubator for people to prototype different ideas, much in the spirit of how Facebook got founded originally. The idea that you can build anything good in a day or a couple of days, right, and get a version of that running.
So you get it running, you then test it internally?
Yeah, and then we can see, and that helps us shape the roadmap and what we want to do in the future. But we also have a culture where we want to stay very focused, and we don't want to run with a lot of projects that we don't expect to launch, right? So we want to get a lot of ideas, have those ideas shape where we want to go, and then execute in a very focused way on the stuff that we're going to do. But I mean, our culture, I mean, we have a few values that are really important to us. And one, which I talked about before, is just moving fast, right? The whole company is really optimized around someone joining, being able to build something very quickly, be able to launch it quickly, iterate very quickly on that.
The first set of schools that we launched at after Harvard were schools that had other kind of school-specific social networks. So I think it was Stanford had something, Columbia had something, and I think Yale had something. So I think
Why did you choose ones that had school-specific social networks?
Because I wanted to
competitors.
Well, I wanted to go to the schools that I thought would be the hardest for us to succeed at, because I knew that if we had a product that was better than everything else that other students were making at other colleges, then it would be worth investing in and putting time into. But I didn't want to just kind of like get into a project where there would end up being this huge legacy of maintaining it if ultimately there were just going to be different things that were as good as it. I turned down this offer to sell the company. The management team, who were a bunch of pretty experienced folks, but who hadn't spent a lot of time working at Facebook, weren't that steeped in what we were trying to do. The group basically fell apart. Within I think it was 18 months after that, every single other person on the management team either quit or it was just so dysfunctional that I had to fire them. And most of them quit. And that was really challenging, because I think I was like 22 at the time. So again, it's like I hadn't learned most of the lessons that I have learned to this point on managing. But I kind of feel like when you have internal team cohesion and you have a team that believes in something, you can get a lot of things done and you can handle a lot of adversity. But when that starts to break down, it becomes very hard to get things done. And even so, through the other big challenges that we've had to navigate over time, not just the last couple of years, but after we went public, right, we had a big business model challenge. We were transitioning from a desktop and web-based business to mobile. Our app wasn't in the space that I wanted it to be. We didn't have ads in Newsfeed yet, so we weren't sure if that was going to work. And we went public, and our market cap got cut in half within the first year. And people doubted whether we were going to be able to make this transition to mobile. And empirically, that's not a crazy thing to doubt, because a lot of technology companies basically die or really lose their way during these big technology shifts, right? So of which going from web to mobile was certainly one. But through that period, we were able to maintain very good team cohesion internally. Everyone had a strong sense of mission. They knew what we were there to do. They believed in the products. They cared about connecting people and bringing the services to more people around the world. So it didn't end up being that challenging of a period in the grand scheme of things. Not that many people quit. People saw through the challenge that we needed to go do, and we came out of that well. But the internal team cohesion thing is a really big deal. We are gathered here at the second biggest event called F8 this week. And, we probably should have seen this one coming after Fast and Furious 7. Didn't. It's our bad. Now, while we don't have The Rock here today, we do have the tech equivalent, David "The Rock" Marcus. And while we may not live our lives a quarter mile at a time, I know at least some people here live their lives one quarterly earnings at a time. All right. All right, bear with me. I got one more for you. All right. While Fast and Furious's tagline is
never give up on family. Ours is similar, never give up on the family of apps. All right, not as catchy, not as catchy. I could just keep going. I wrote like 6 more of these, but I understand that some of you are here to see a tech keynote.
You suck!
I can't help it.
Now I've got a really special bonus clip that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the question of the day. I want to know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video, and what are you going to do to take action on it this week? When you write down what day, what time, and what place you're going to take action on something, you have a 91% chance of following through versus just 35% if you got motivated but never wrote down a plan. And when you share your plan and have public accountability, it raises your chances of following through even higher. So that's what I want to do today for you guys. You watch this video. What was your single biggest takeaway, and what is your plan to take action on it this week? Let me know. Put it down in the comments below.
When you first launched, in the very beginning, the features were sort of profile with like a profile photo and your name and who you are. And also you included things like what house you lived in, what dorm you lived in, and what courses you were taking. Do you think it would have worked without that? Would it have been enough just to have profiles?
You know, it's a really interesting question. I mean, we certainly since then have evolved and wanted to make a more general service, so we've dropped some of those things. But I remember there's this early debate that Dustin and I had where we had to do some manual work for every school that we released Facebook at. And in order to do that, we basically went through and we parsed the course catalogs of the schools to make sure that the data was clean. And I remember having this debate where Dustin was like, we could just expand so much faster, or it would just be easier. I mean, we were bound by server capacity, but it would be easier to launch new schools if we didn't have to have course catalogs for each school. And we just had this really long debate about what quality meant for us and the community that we wanted to establish and the culture of it. And you know, in retrospect, you know, maybe it wouldn't have had a huge difference on how things played out, but it definitely kind of set this tone where there's a lot of kind of clean data on Facebook. You can rely on it. It feels like a college-specific thing, which was valuable early on for setting the culture, even though obviously since then we've grown beyond that. And you know, I mean, I think you guys in the projects that you work on, you're going to have a lot of similar questions, right? I mean, there's the famous 80-20 rule where, you know, you get 80% of the benefit by doing 20% of the work, but you can't just 80-20 everything, right? I mean, there have to be certain things that you just are the best at, right? And that you go way further than anyone else at to establish this kind of quality bar and have your product be the best thing that's out there. So, you know, whether we had to do that one or had to do something, we had to do, I think, enough of those things, or else we just wouldn't have been the best service out there.
If you want to change your life for free in the next 30 days, check the link right here below me. Or if you want 50 rules from Warren Buffett, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy them. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.